For as long as I can remember, when someone asked me for my thoughts on Raiders of the Lost Ark, my answer was always something like, it's the perfect movie. To this day, it's the movie I rewatch more than any other. I could start it at any point and be fully invested, or even watch it multiple times in a day. But is it actually perfect, or is it just nostalgia coloring everything? Well, I'm hoping to answer that question with this video, where I look at 3 things this movie did right, and 3 things it did wrong. Here's my analysis of Indiana Jones' first adventure, Raiders of the Lost Ark from 1981. And I'd love to hear in the comments what you guys think this movie's strengths and weaknesses are. And I hope every single person mentions Indiana Jones, because he is my first and most obvious strength in Raiders of the Lost Ark. I've always taken it for granted that Indy was an iconic character and that this was an iconic performance by Harrison Ford, but I never really looked at it very closely. It was just sort of an accepted fact. And analyzing Raiders in this manner didn't change that whatsoever, but what it did is it highlighted just how well Indiana Jones is introduced in this film. The movie opens up with this trek through 1936 South America, with Indy completely obscured other than his silhouette. Through the immaculate visual storytelling of Steven Spielberg's direction, we piece together elements of determination, confidence, knowledge, and frankly, danger. All of this before he's actually done a single thing. And when he finally whips out that whip to deal with this dude, the music that plays is not the music you would expect. It's not that triumphant Raiders march. No, instead we get this. That is one hell of a hero shot, but this is not like a nice and fluffy character. That music was super menacing, and even as we get to know Indiana Jones the character, he's really gruff and abrasive. He's physically manhandling Satipo or flat out ignoring him through much of the scene, and yet he's still likable, due in no small part to the delicate balance struck by Harrison Ford. He seems above it all, barely registering any fear when he's got tarantulas on his back, or really acknowledging how horrifying it should be that he just found his competitor's dead body. This is a guy who seems to have a grasp on any situation and knows what to do no matter what happens. But there's more to Indiana Jones than it appears, because as cocky as he seems, or how many of those trademark Harrison Ford shit-eating half grins he does in this sequence, this scene is all about stripping away that aura of hyper-competent arrogance, as absolutely everything that could go wrong does go wrong, and then all of that glory from finding that idol is scavenged by his rival Renee Belloc. And then shortly thereafter, Indy is running for his life, barely holding onto his hat and his dignity to escape on this plane with absolutely nothing to show for it except for an unexpected seatmate.
I hate snakes, Chuck! I hate them!
This is what Raiders of the Lost Ark does repeatedly with Indiana Jones, and it's why this character has stood the test of time for me. It's why one minute he's a brilliant archaeologist lecturing high-ranking government agents on the Ark of the Covenant, and the next he's alienating his ex, who is the key to finding the Ark. Or he has moments of tactical genius like this, and then he has moments where he comes out on top purely based on luck. That sense that Indy is fallible, that he can be hurt, and that this is all so very exhausting for him is why this character works so well. And do we need to go into depth on the costume? Because this movie's 43 years old. I think everyone knows about the fedora, the leather jacket, the gun, the whip, the satchel. Like, I think it's common knowledge that not only does Harrison Ford look great in it, but it could elevate a mere mortal man into a god. But we're not talking about elevation, we're talking about escalation. And escalation is Raiders of the Lost Ark's second strength. Steven Spielberg is constantly escalating things in this movie. It's why Raiders of the Lost Ark rarely has a dull moment. The prologue with Indy coolly and confidently braving dangers and grabbing that golden idol feels like a rousing success before escalating all of those dangers exponentially in what can only be deemed an epic failure. It's that escalation that keeps the audience on their toes during Raiders of the Lost Ark. Like that fight in Marion's bar in Nepal, it starts like a traditional gunfight, but within minutes the entire place is on fire and Indy is scrambling to survive. Then in Cairo, it begins with this slapsticky sword fight, and then it becomes a chase through the alleys as Marion is whisked away in this one basket, and then it's revealed that there's dozens of baskets that Indy has to search through. Or Indy's scared of one snake? Well, let's have the Ark of the Covenant be in a tomb filled with thousands of snakes.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
The stakes just keep on rising. Like, the plane scene has Indy being pummeled by a giant Nazi as just one of like 5 crazy situations going on at the same time. It just keeps escalating to the point that once a giant Nazi is obliterated by the propeller, the audience is desperately in need of a cathartic, crowd-pleasing moment. And everyone remembers this iconic shot, but I personally prefer the much less famous one immediately before that, when Indy and Marion are trying to escape and you can see the fire trail spreading in the background. It's like a visual representation of Spielberg's whole storytelling ethos of Escalation. And the same goes for the truck scene. And I don't feel like I need to go into too much detail on this scene because it is literally one of the greatest action sequences ever, and I'm sure everyone's very familiar with it. But I do want to point out how simply it starts. It's just Indy on a horse trying to catch up to this truck that's got the Ark in it. But by the end of its nearly 8-minute duration, Indy has jumped into the truck, thrown Nazis out of the truck, had fistfights with Nazis in the truck, been shot at by this manned machine gun, had Nazis clambering all over the truck like little fire ants, knocked this Jeep off a cliff, knocked this motorcycle over just for shits and giggles, gotten shot in the shoulder, gotten punched in the same shoulder repeatedly, gotten thrown out of the front cabin of the truck. He's nearly crushed between the truck and Belloc's car. He climbs under the truck and he's dragged behind the truck by his whip, climbs all the way back around, gets back in the truck, knocks the same Nazi out of the truck. That Nazi tries to repeat the same thing Indy does, and then he just gets run out. Oh, okay, I just did describe it in incredible detail. Raiders of the Lost Ark is Indy bouncing from one catastrophe to another and trying to keep his wits about him. It's why this line is so perfect.
I'm going after that truck.
Oh.
I don't know. I'm making this up as I go.
Spielberg also manages to subtly escalate drama during simple exposition scenes through character movement, dynamic camera angles, interesting shot compositions, and unique props. And then maybe the most interesting bit of escalation comes during the climactic ritual. When people were watching this movie in the theaters back in 1981, I don't think anyone could have predicted what was going to happen when Belloc and the Nazis opened the Ark. Because up till this point, the movie had had so many over-the-top action set pieces and just dramatic moments, but it was always rooted in reality. But this ending works so well because Spielberg suddenly escalates things into this supernatural bonanza where Nazis' faces are being melted, Belloc's head is exploding, and just God is basically being revealed as being all-powerful and real. It's so good. And to cap off this theme of escalation, what better way to end the film than to watch the Ark of the Covenant be stored in a crate and packed away amongst a sea of similar crates? Steven Spielberg is a masterful storyteller. It's like every couple of minutes, something happens to destabilize the plot and the characters, and it works wonders.
We never seem to get a break, do we?
Not quite, Marion, because immediately after that line is delivered, I think Raiders of the Lost Ark loses quite a bit of steam, which is weakness number 1. Like, I get needing to sort of slow down after the breakneck pace that we'd had going through the truck scene, but we do that already. We have that great send-off by Sallah, and then the love scene, and both of those scenes are really effective at what they do. But then the movie just never really regains its momentum after that. The Nazis board Katanga's ship and kidnap Marion and steal back the Ark, but these are things that have already happened before, so it doesn't match that sense of escalating stakes we'd had throughout the movie. So Indy getting on the U-boat is unsatisfying, no matter how chill-inducing this specific shot is. This is all followed by Indy in the U-boat base itself, which is forgettable because it's played more for humor than tension. And then the trek through the desert does have a good character beat when Belloc calls Indy's bluff about blowing up the Ark.
All your life has been spent in pursuit of archaeological relics. You want to see it open as well as I.
But it just doesn't pack enough of a punch because the last several scenes have just been Indy sort of tagging along and not really doing anything. He hasn't been an active participant, so him just surrendering here is not satisfying. And then we get the face melting scene, which is great. Like, I love that scene. But after several scenes of Indy not really accomplishing much, he doesn't do anything again. The entire situation just resolves itself without his involvement. And that segues into weakness number 2, and this one is admittedly more of a nitpick that doesn't really bother me that much. But there are a couple of scenes during Raiders of the Lost Ark where stuff is happening to the characters, and then things just resolve themselves without the characters actually doing anything. And the biggest example is during the Ark opening scene, because Indy and Marion are tied up, they have no way of escaping. And let's ignore the fact that the Nazis didn't kill them for some reason, but how are they going to get out of this? Well, first, Indy has to pull this rabbit out of his ass.
Marion, don't look at it. Shut your eyes, Marion. Don't look at it no matter what happens.
When did Indy learn this? Like, at what point in the movie did he come up with this piece of knowledge? I don't know, it just comes out of nowhere, and it ends up saving their lives, and I can accept that with a bit of an eye roll, but it's also very helpful of God to not just smite all of those Nazis, but to also burn Indy and Marion's rope so that they aren't tied up till they starve to death. That's just convenient. But in a scene this good, I can roll with that kind of convenience. Other scenes make that tougher though, like the Cairo clip I just showed. This place is filled with murderers. How is Indy not dead here? Like, those were hired goons in like a shisha bar. They're probably drunk, and yet not one of them had an itchy trigger finger? Just because some kids ran in, not one of them popped a shot at Indy here? Makes no sense. Like, this just feels like dramatic tension for no reason at all. And that same thing happens when we have the map room scene. This scene is so powerful. That sense of discovering and unearthing ancient secrets is perfect. And yet for some reason, it's combined with this little misadventure where Sallah gets dragged away from the hole and has to find a way for Indy to climb out. It adds nothing to the scene other than this sight gag. Indy isn't even aware that something is wrong, and it resolves itself without any real drama. Similarly, escaping from the Well of Souls is perfectly satisfying if Indy just heroically knocks down this wall. So why do we need this 20-second sequence of Marion stuck in between all these skeletons when the terror is just going to abruptly end when Indy reappears?
Marion! Look.
Like, where did that skull snake go? Logistically, it should be right there next to Indy, yet there's no reaction, and Indy has a childhood fear of snakes. Why is he not reacting? Then again, I had a childhood fear of Tote, and now that seems kinda silly. And that is weakness number 3 for Raiders of the Lost Ark. The villains are all kind of meh. The Nazis are great as the overall bad guys. I mean, who doesn't like seeing them get killed every which way? But the actual named villains just don't stack up to your Hans Grubers or your T-1000s. Dietrich is the main Nazi, but most of his dialogue is him whining about schedules, and Belloc having a history of snatching up Indy's hard work is a neat hook. But if he's not going to be Indy's physical equal, I want to see him as an intellectual threat, and while the movie plays it up that he's as knowledgeable in archaeology as Indiana Jones, we don't actually see it, and Paul Freeman as Belloc just doesn't have enough of a screen presence to capture my attention all that much. Also, side note, I first saw this movie when I was 7 years old on like a 19-inch grainy TV on a VHS copy taped off of cable, and I never realized that Belloc is the guy wearing the robes in the ritual scene. Like, I just thought Belloc disappeared from the movie, and then this random guy was chanting some stuff. Like, that's how forgettable Belloc was for me. But remember, child me was not very qualified at judging characters because he used to be scared of Tote.
That time is past.
Yeah, that time has passed because what is Tote? Tote is nothing. Tote does nothing in this movie. Like, he has a couple of memorable moments, but I just don't think Tote, the character, is as dangerous as the movie's trying to make us believe. And yeah, the reason I was so scared of Tote was he was a terrifying presence in his very first scene in Marion's bar. And his role as the perfect man for this work does seem appropriate when he prevents Marion's escape later, nefariously brandishes a coat hanger, and chillingly asks this question.
What should we talk about?
I don't know, Tote. How about that you were built up to be this sadistic torturer, and all of the information you managed to glean from this encounter was this?
You like her too much, I think.
Wow, Tote, way to underperform. Like, what was your interrogation technique that you managed to obtain the information that the French archaeologist that you and the Nazis hired to obtain the Ark has a crush on the ex-girlfriend of the American archaeologist who is currently, at this moment, stealing the Ark from right under your noses? Like, why does it feel like that off-screen interrogation went something like this?
What should we talk about?
But even though I spent the last several minutes talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark's flaws, this movie still wins me over each time I watch it because it's got so much spirit, so much heart, which is strength number 3. And I talked a lot about Indiana Jones, the character, already. He's a big part of that heart. And another part of that heart is Marion Ravenwood, played by Karen Allen. This movie would have worked if it was just set piece after set piece with Indy killing Nazis, but I think that would have gotten old without balancing the fun with some heartfelt emotion. And by introducing Marion, a character whom Indy has a complicated history with, we get exactly that.
What you did to me in my life.
I can only say I'm sorry so many times.
Well, say it again anyway.
Indy being physically fallible makes him feel like just a guy, but his emotional fallibility makes him relatable.
Trying to escape.
How hard were you trying?
Well, where the hell were you?
Watch it, watch it. Fire!
Yep, so relatable. It reminds me of times when I try to make my wife feel bad for something, and then she points out something very obvious and very true that I actually did wrong and caused the conflict in the first place, and then I try to change the subject by saying, "Oh, your dress is on fire." Works never. But back to the point at hand, Marion feels like the perfect match for Indy. She's strong, tenacious, she makes mistakes, she has a badass introduction, and she's just a fantastic and big personality that gives Raiders of the Lost Ark that extra spark. I do think the movie makes her too much of a damsel in distress at times, but that feels more like a writing issue than a character issue. She's always being proactive in some way, and I love Karen Allen's performance. She's by far the best female lead in the Indiana Jones series. It's not just Marion, though, that is responsible for this movie's heart. There's also the brief but warm relationship we see between Indy and Marcus Brody at the beginning of the movie. There's this mentor vibe I get, and this deep respect that again works to sell the audience on rooting for a character like Indiana Jones. And also Sallah is just a fun character that I enjoy seeing in these movies. He's so jovial, and he gets a great hero moment, even though he only gets that moment because Indy doesn't eat dates like a normal person.
Bad dates.
Bad dates, but certainly not a bad movie. Raiders is amazing, and that's not just nostalgia speaking. Yes, there are very legitimate flaws that keep this from being the perfect movie my brain wants to label it as, but my affection for it is not just because of nostalgia. It's such a well-crafted adventure that strikes the right mix between intense set pieces and fun, somewhat silly character beats that still fit the tone of the movie perfectly. I think if I watched it for the first time today, I would still feel Raiders' brilliance. So thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and I'd love to hear in the comments what you guys think of this video, and also what you think of this movie. What do you think its strengths and its flaws are? Do you even think it has flaws? Do you think it has strengths? If you didn't think it had strengths, why would you even be watching this movie? I don't know. Talking is making my mouth really dry. I need to find a snack. Maybe some saltines. And I'm going to eat this like a normal person, because normal people eat food like this. That was a waste of a saltine.